Today I want to talk to you about the least understood part of the feminine, but by far the most important. Now, what I mean about the least understood is that in our overly rational culture, intuition, this is what I'm talking about, is ridiculed. It's really, it's thought of as irrational and not scientific. You cannot trust it as such. It is thought of as if you are intuitive and you know answers just from yourself, people think of you as mad. But what I would like to show to you, or what I would like to rather talk to you, is that intuition by far is the most important part of the feminine. Now, I know that some of you are going to say it is love or feeling, which is really relationship, is relating to humans and relating to nature, relating to animals and so on. Yes, that's important. That's a very important value of the feminine, but the oldest and the most widely worshipped throughout our history, and the most widely painted, especially depicted in art, has always been intuition. And what is intuition? Really, intuition in the simplest terms is knowing without having to look it up in a book or Google it or ask anyone. The answer just comes to you, bang, you got it. It's often called wisdom beyond learning. In the earliest depictions of the goddess, which is really the feminine, the intuition, can be found in the earliest depictions of art, which is what we have found in what's now called the Venus of Holy Fels in Germany. She's dated, it's a figurine, of a female, of a woman, big-breasted and large-bodied and very tiny head. The head wasn't all that important. That is to say, it's not a representation of a particular person, but a representation of the all, representation of everything or everyone. So it does not have a particular face to it. The important thing to notice here, on her body, on her abdomen, she is covered with zigzags, or rather with the labyrinth, the pathway between this dimension, the visible dimension, and the invisible dimension. And that's our intuition. And this is the earliest depiction of that, the feminine as intuition, which is roughly about 40,000 years old. Then we move into, for instance, to the Neolithic, and the cultures centered in the feminine, in the areas of old Europe where Maria Gimbutas has done most of her work. And the predominant figures, so the little figurines that she was studying as an archaeologist, or archaeomythology, because she used folklore and mythology to interpret the meaning of these statues. And by far the most prominent, again, is the bird goddess. Now, the bird goddess, she has the body of a woman. She can have big breasts or not, but she has the head of a bird, and sometimes she's winged. So you see, this is again a visual representation of the feminine as intuition. And why bird, for instance? Well, the bird has the ability to fly. So you see, it's the flight of your intuitive imagination between this dimension, this visible dimension, and the invisible dimension of the spirit. So the bird can live on the ground and lives in the sky. See, the sky was later actually interpreted as as heaven, the dimension of the spirit, the underworld. But before that, during this time, for instance, in the Neolithic, what I'm talking about, the bird would have been associated with mainly with living on the land, flight, and living on water. And water was seen as the realm of the invisible, of the spirits, of the underworld. So it has the capacity to live in these three realities. The sky would have been the universe, the earth would have been this visible dimension, and the invisible dimension that supports everything on this planet and in the universe, the energy consciousness, the spirit or mind at large or collective unconscious, whatever you like to call it. That is represented by water, or underwater, in that unknown dimension of underwater. And specifically these birds would have been ducks, swans, or geese. So if you look at the images of the Neolithic goddess, by far the biggest number of the statuettes that were found were the bird goddess, and next to that would have been the snake, because the snake has the ability to live underground and on the surface. So it can bring the wisdom from underground, from underworld into this dimension. That again is intuition. And you've got the tongue darting. It's feeling, it's intuiting its way through life. And again, a snake can live on the ground and on the water or on a tree. So it's got the similar meaning as bird. And in the Neolithic, also the goddess would have been represented as intuition in a form of a frog, because again a frog lives on the water and on the ground, so it's that got the ability to live in two dimensions as your intuition does. You see, intuition is, what I'm talking about, is the third eye, the eye that sits between the two dimensions. There's your left eye, the dimension of seeing world, and or the dimension of the underworld, and the right eye, the dimension of the seen world. You see, the numinous and the physical, so the frog has the ability to live between the two, as a hedgehog. And hedgehogs were also represented as that goddess, as the feminine, as intuition in many sculptures in the Neolithic. And then moving along, we will have the stories. For instance, I'll tell you a few stories from Greek mythology. For instance, when Jason and the Argonauts set out to recover the golden fleece, and golden fleece is a symbol of the soul, of the consciousness, of your interaction with that deeper dimension of the spirit through intuition, the gold. When they were about to enter into that unknown, into that magical dimension of the afterlife, they had to sail between two rocks which clashed together. And on board there was a musician called Orpheus. And Orpheus was a musician, a singer, and a poet. And he had befriended a dove, a white dove, which then the Orpheus sent out in front to fly before the Argo, the boat, and that's how the Argonauts made it through. So you see, again, here the bird, the goddess, the feminine or the intuition leads the way between the opposites. And that's how you get through the center, through the middle way, the Buddha's middle way. That's exactly the same thing, into the other dimension, into the dimension of the afterlife or underworld, where you recover the golden fleece. Another such story is of Odysseus, and when Odysseus was initiated by the goddess of golden locks called Sars, Sarki, she initiated Odysseus into recovery of his own inner seer. You see, he had to travel to the underworld first, to the realm of the dead, to recover the old man he was blind, but he could see into the future, or he could see things that were not visible to the physical eye. So this is the recovery of the intuition first. And then once he recovered this intuition, this old man who was called Tiresias, and once he recovered this and he got the directions from him, then his second initiation was to the unity of all life. And then he, like Argonauts, Jason and the Argonauts, he too had to sail between rocks, between two shores. On one shore there was the screaming voices, on the other shore there was a vortex of too much emotional feeling, if you like, and he had to sail between these two to make it to the Isle of Saki's father, the sun, and that's where he was initiated to the unity of all life. Now this is already this is Greek mythology, so this is patriarchal mythology. So the highest deity would be male, a father figure, the sun, or the rational mind. But for instance, so that's how Odysseus had to do it as well, through the intuition, through the middle way, through to sailing between the opposites and so on. I was just watching a documentary on Chauvet Cave in France, which is dated to some 32,000 BC. And there, in one of the deepest chambers, there's a hole, a fissure through which water gushes through when it rains for a long time. And around that fissure, around that hole, around that natural well, if you like, spring, there were animals. Most animals were painted around that hole, drawn around that hole, and the animals were painted or drawn in such a way that they seemed alive. So water is also an image of this deep feminine, of intuition, because water, like from that fissure, comes from the unknown and brings into this world, brings life. Because everywhere you have fresh water, you will have life. Plants will grow, humanity can live. So water is a symbol of the intuition, and that's where you had the animals drawn, because an animal is also self-directing. It's autonomous. It has its own self-consciousness, and that's the image of intuition, because you are connected, intuitively connected to this deeper dimension of the spirit. You thrive. You don't need to ask anyone. You don't need to read it in a book or collect facts or examples or anything like that. You don't need to remember anything. You just need to be curious and stay with the question until that question is answered to you, and that happens to you in an instant, intuitively. And so water is a image of the feminine, of the intuition, and water has been worshipped, like I said, in that cave 30,000, and much older than that, from archaeological records. Archaeological records show. And if we go back to the Neolithic and what I was talking about, the goddesses, the bird goddess and the snake goddess and hedgehogs and so on, in many the people already had a language there, and the meanders or zigzags were representing of water, and a lot of the sites which were when we had the gushing waters or natural springs and wells were marked with zigzags, so that we know that water was worshipped as one of the symbols of the goddess a long time before. And in fact, in many of the holiest sites to Virgin Mary, to be found on the old pagan sites of natural springs where water just bubbles up naturally from underground. In fact, many churches were built on these old pagan sites too, where the water, where the wells, where the lakes were, in many. I was watching once a documentary in England, the ancient stone buildings and Stonehenge or Newgrange and so on. They've actually discovered places on lakes which were already by now have dried up, but back then there were lakes, and people used to throw offerings into these lakes. So they would have damaged for instance, their weapons. The weapons would have been bent or broken and thrown as an offering. This is a way of saying, I give up my conditioning. I give up my outside attention to pay attention inward to what's coming into me intuitively. That's the water. That's the water. And I just remembered now, I was watching in that documentary as well on the stone buildings in England, or the stone circles and so on. There was a cave, a deep cave. At the deepest part of that cave, the carvings in the wall were birds. So you had to crawl to make it all the way to the deepest part of the cave, and there, right at that place, the deepest part of the hardest to get to place, the revelation was a bird. You see, there again is intuition. There again is the feminine as intuition, that reality that bridges this world and the invisible world. In fact, Newgrange, if you were to go through the corridor and up to the end, and there at the end there's a carved stone, and in the stone there are 3 spirals interlocked together, and the 3 spirals represent, there's your journey to the center, to the most inward center, and in the most inward center you will find that bubbling spring. There comes the wisdom, the information, the life that comes from there, and the life goes back into it as well. From the center, it goes more and more out. There's more life, more different sorts of variety of life, and the more you come into the center, there's the source of all that single source of all that variety of different life. But this spiral in Newgrange is into the 3 of them. Remember what I was telling you about the Neolithic goddess, especially in the form of the bird, like a duck or a goose or a swan. It lived in the air, it lived on the ground and on the earth, and it lived in the water. This is the same meaning, the 3 worlds together, the universe, this dimension of earth, and that 3rd dimension that underlines it, or the invisible dimension. And this was the revelation. When you went there through that corridor, there is a little box, an opening up above the entrance to that huge mount. And at the particular time, I think it is in December, light comes through and shines all the way to that stone right at the back, and it illuminates this spiral, which is interconnected spiral. And there you get intuitively, through the spiral, through the center, intuitively you get it, that all 3 dimensions of reality are one. You get this oneness. You see, that's the whole purpose of recovery of your intuition, of the deepest feminine, because you're not really going to get it intellectually. You won't. You might collect, you will eventually, by elimination. This is not it, this is not that, this is not that, but intuitively you get it in an instant, bang, and there it is, I will tell you a story of how I experienced. I mean, I've experienced it many times, and many of you who follow me, for instance, on Facebook, where I'm probably most active, is that I have shared with you, and in my books as well, the stories of my own journeys inward into these dimensions, guided by by the intuition. And one of these stories, I don't know whether I've shared it in my book or not, the latest book, I know I've shared it on Facebook, that was years and years ago. And I was working with symbols very energetically, and one day I'm just sitting on my couch and I'm wondering, well, you know, I've looked at all the different symbols now, what should I work with? And then it just came to me straight away that I should look at the symbols of symbol of the origin of life, or the creation myth. The creation myth. And I thought, well, fair enough, I'll look at the creation myth, and there I was. I started with one creation myth, and I was, you know, I opened up the Wikipedia page, I looked up the creation myth, which led to another creation myth, that led to another, and I was working on reading between the lines intuitively. And I worked like that for days. I went through creation myth of the North American Indians, I went through the Christian creation myth, the Old Testament, the Hindu, the people of the Pacific, and, you know, in Japanese creation myth of, one day there I am sitting and looking at them, and then it just hit me without a warning. I was just looking at it, and suddenly I saw, well, this is just a single story. There's just one story that underlines all the different stories. They all might be tinted with their particular tradition, language, geographical location, but underneath all that, there's just one single story of the creation of the world from that single center. You see, there's the first mound, or the first couple, or the first something that is that just from that origin. If a single origin comes out everything. And this revelation played out in my mind, what said, we are all one. And I knew in an instant that there is just oneness in the world. There's no, you know, even though that we speak different languages, live in different geographical locations, we might fight amongst ourselves whose religion is the best. Underneath all that everyday nonsense, there is just this single reality, the single thing that, you know, the life comes from the single source, from that invisible dimension, and it just multiplies itself in ever more unique ways. That's all it was. And that night I have this dream. I find myself in a boat, a sailboat on a sea. It's dark. It's just like it's dark. On a sailboat. I'm the only passenger on the sailboat. I'm sitting at the front of the boat and looking ahead to where I'm being led, because I'm being led by a spiritual being. It's towing a rope, a long rope, and it's towing the rope, and it's walking on water, or rather, it's walking on a path which is illuminated just under the surface of the water. And it's towing my boat. There's a spiritual being that it's towing my boat, like a towboat, if you like. But there's this spiritual being towing my boat, and he's walking. He's not really walking on water. The feet were underwater. The body was above water, but I could see that there was a lit path just beneath this huge depth all around me. And this spiritual being knew exactly where to walk. So, you know, I wasn't sinking into the unconscious. I was following the intuition. But that's what the spiritual being means. And then we arrive at an island. And at an island, I see that on the beach, there's a great gathering of people. There's a welcoming committee for me. I've disembarked my boat. I don't know where the spiritual being has gone, my guide, the intuition, because I was following my intuition when I was working with the with the symbols, you see. But I see that the welcoming committee is at the front. Stand two people: a queen, an old woman, and her consort, a king. And behind them there was the courtiers, if you like. But there was the witch there was a wizard there was a prince, princess, a knight, a priest, for instance. And I knew intuitively that there were the archetypes, the things out of which our whole culture is built, the blueprints of our of all the artists and poets and priests and wizards And all these things are just, that these are the archetypes of all that. The foundations of entire society. And at the front of this, this welcoming committee, if you like, was the queen and the king. And I knew also intuitively that this is where we go to where we die. So I've gone beyond the wall of death. I've gone to that archetypal level, to the level of the spirit. When symbolically I was talking about the water gushing from there and we don't know what's beyond there. Whoa, that's like going beyond to that dimension and seeing what's happening there. Your guide, your intuition takes you there if that's what you want. This is the same thing as some people call it die before dying. So you die to your outside life, or you drop your body, if you like. This is the similar thing as out-of-body experience or near-death experience. When you see yourself floating above the bed and then suddenly perhaps you have the most popular way is the tunnel, the tunnel of light, and on the other side there's a guide waiting for you to take you further. But if it's not your time, you got to return, do some more work, because you might not understand what is being shown to you, the oneness of all life, the archetypal foundations of all existence. And then I walked up to, or the queen with the consort walked up to me, we embraced, and a huge voice said, where we are all one and there shouldn't be any further divisions. So this was my confirmation of the revelation that I had the night before, intuitively, that there is underneath all the cultures, the religions, the politics, underneath all the borders that we placed, between ourselves, underneath all that, there is just one humanity, one country, Earth, and that dream showed that to me because I got it intuitively, you see. And then having dropped the body, like if you like, or an out-of-body experience, bang, I was there. And this is the realm, this is where we go to when we die, really. I had the strongest feeling that this is where it is. I wasn't told this, but I knew this is where the souls of the dead go to learn of the origins of all life. So this is why I wanted to talk to you today about the least understood part of the feminine. People, stress love and a feeling, which is very important because a feeling is missing in our culture too. We're not relating to each other. We're kind of competing with each other and dominating each other for resources, because the survival instincts kick in. And so relationship is very, very important. But by far the oldest, the core of the feminine is intuition, and it's the part which is least understood in our culture because it's ridiculed by our culture. This kind of brings me to the season, because we're coming up to Halloween, and you might have noticed I've got a few candles burning and I'm trying to create the atmosphere here, but it's getting really hot in the room now because it's warm outside. It's a day, I'm filming this during the day, so it's not night yet. What I wanted to say is that we are coming up to this threshold, to this time in the year where the living and the dead come together. This is the time of Halloween, and we even see kids dress up in these costumes. They might dress up as a witch, or as a Dracula, for instance, or some other spiritual being. Now, Dracula has been also demonized in our patriarchal culture, but he only lives in the night. You see, he's also the symbol of the mystery and magic of the night. He is a bat, and a bat has the ability to fly into the dark, into the unconscious, into the unknown. So he's also a figure of intuition, as is a witch. Because witches, if you read the stories, like the story of the Baba Yaga, for instance, Durga, and so other many different names for the witch, she lives in the forest or at the edge of the forest. She's not afraid of it. In other words, she lives in the unconscious. She lives in that dimension of the underworld. She's not afraid of it. She's on the border. She's always 1 foot in this dimension, visible dimension, but the other is firmly placed in that dimension of the unknown, of the mystical, of the intuitive. You see? And that's why she flies a broom. Now, because flying is nothing less than your bird, you see what I was telling you about. It is the flight of your intuitive imagination between this dimension and the other. That's why in Harry Potter's movies, it was the owl that used to bring messages to kids in Hogwarts, the School of Wizardry. Do you see? So the witch is, for most part, has been very demonized in our patriarchal culture, but she is the mystery. She is the sorely missing and ridiculed part of the feminine, the intuition. The intuition that, like light, like candlelight, is symbolic of that journey or kinship between the phenomenal and the numinous. So during this special period of time where the outer veins sort of disappears and the inner dimension of life opens up to you, I wish to you from my heart that you start to honor your intuition more. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.